two boys went into the woods behind their house and never came out on their own. George Cox was 7 years old. His brother Joseph was 5. It was the end of April 1856 in a small clearing called Pavia, deep in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania. A place so remote that the nearest neighbors were farms scattered across ridges, connected by paths through unbroken timber. Their father, Samuel, had gone out that afternoon with his rifle, chasing something through the trees behind the cabin. He thought the boys were home with their mother. Their mother thought they had followed their father the way they sometimes did. By the time anyone realized those two assumptions did not match, the light was already failing and two small children were somewhere in a forest that had no visible end in any direction, and the temperature was already starting to drop. Pavia was the kind of place where the mountains did the deciding. Steep ridges, dense timber, creeks that all looked the same once you were a quarter mile from your own door, a landscape that swallowed sound and direction equally. Within hours of the boys going missing, word spread to every farm in the valley, carried on foot and on horseback, and people came. Search parties moved out from the Cox cabin in every direction, calling the boys' names into the trees, working the creek bottoms, checking under every fallen log large enough to shelter a child from the cold. The first night passed with nothing, then the second. Late April in the Alleghenies can still freeze overnight, and everyone searching knew exactly what that meant for two children without coats. By the third day, the search had grown into one of the largest the region had ever seen. Men coming from towns the Cox family had never visited, walking the same hills from dawn until they could no longer see, finding nothing and going home each night only to start again before light. 10 days in, with the search exhausted and the weather worsening, a local man named Jacob DeBert had a dream. In it, he was walking through unfamiliar woods and came across a dead deer lying in the brush. Past the deer, a child's shoe half sunk in leaves. Further on, a creek he did not recognize, with a fallen beech tree lying across it like a makeshift bridge. He crossed the log in the dream, climbed down into a ravine on the other side, and there, beneath a birch tree, he found what he had been searching for all along. Debert woke and told his wife. The next night, the same dream returned, unchanged, landmark for landmark. He told Harrison Wysong, one of the men leading the search effort, what he had seen. Twice, now. Identical both times. They decided to follow it, not because either man believed dreams could lead anywhere, but because every direction the search had tried so far had led nowhere, and this was a direction nobody had tried. They walked out from the search area toward a stretch of mountain nobody had covered because the terrain there was steep and broken, and the searchers had assumed two small boys simply could not have traveled that far on their own. Debert led the way, retracing the dream step by step, a dead deer, exactly as he had seen it. Then a child's shoe half buried in leaves at the edge of the path. Then a creek, Kiana Run, with a beech log fallen across it just as the dream had shown. They crossed the log. On the other side was a ravine, steep-sided and overgrown, the kind of place a person could walk past a dozen times in daylight and never think to look down into. Debert and Wysong climbed down into it. At the bottom, beneath a birch tree, they found George and Joseph Cox. The boys were together, side by side. George's arm was around his younger brother, as though he had pulled him close for warmth in the last hours. They had been dead for several days. It was May 8th, 14 days after they had walked out the cabin door behind their father. Most of these stories don't get told twice. If this channel disappears from your feed, the algorithm won't bring it back. Subscribe so the next one finds you. The story of the dream spread faster than the story of the search ever had. Within a few years, it was being retold across the region, and within a generation, it had become something close to local scripture. The version told to children at bedtime, the version that explained how the mountain had given the boys back at all when it so easily could have kept them. But not every version of the story stayed kind. As the dream grew more famous, so did the questions surrounding it. How had one man known exactly where to look in terrain nobody else had searched, down to a specific sequence of landmarks, not once but twice, in a dream that repeated itself unchanged 2 nights running? Some people in the valley began to wonder, quietly at first, and then less quietly, whether a dream was really the only thing that had led Jacob DeBear to that ravine. The suspicion was never formalized. No one was ever charged with anything, and no evidence beyond the coincidence itself was ever produced. But the rumor outlived the people who first whispered it, the way rumors tend to in places where everyone has always known everyone, and where a story, once it takes root, rarely lets go entirely. The rumors followed Jacob for years, echoing quietly through the hollows until a larger shadow fell over the whole country. When the Civil War came, Jacob left the mountains and enlisted, the same as a great many men from those hills did. He served with the 55th Pennsylvania Volunteers. In October of 1864, he fell sick at a Union camp at Point of Rocks, Virginia, and died there of dysentery before the war's end. He was buried there in a mass grave alongside other soldiers whose names were not always recorded with much care. A soldier's grave far from the ravine where, 8 years earlier, he had climbed down to find 2 small boys beneath a birch tree. Back home in Bedford County, his name was later carved onto a memorial honoring local men who had served and died in the war. One name among dozens, the man who had found the lost children reduced to a single line of carved. The monument to George and Joseph Cox still stands today off a gravel road branching from Route 869, a short walk into the trees on what is now state game land, and it reads exactly what a monument raised in 1910 would read, that the lost children of the Alleghenies were found here on May 8, 1856 by Jacob DeBeart and Harrison Wysong, and it says nothing else, nothing about the dream that repeated itself 2 nights running, nothing about the rumors that followed DeBeart for the rest of his life, nothing about the mass grave in Virginia where he ended up 8 years later, and the woods around that monument today look very much like they must have looked then. Dense and quiet and entirely indifferent, the kind of woods that can hold 2 small boys and a man's unmarked grave a world away, and a dream and a rumor all at once, and give no sign on an ordinary afternoon that any of it ever happened here at all. That's another voice from the hollow. If this one stayed with you, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, The Stories America Left Behind.